Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had multiple sides part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝗵𝗲 𝗔𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲 from AO3. So let's start the video. Prologue. I never heard of her chapter text. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be All Might. I mean, he's basically the entire world's favorite #1 hero. He saves everyone with a smile. I couldn't imagine taking out powerful villains left and right like that, even if I do fight sometimes. That guy is just a beam of hope everywhere he goes. But at the same time, being at the top takes a lot of effort, doesn't it? I wonder if he ever feels burned out. And then we have me. In case you haven't figured it out already, I'm Taiyo. 𝗧𝗵𝗲. I'm kind of different, and no, that's not because I'm probably one of the only dark people you'll see in China. I have dissociative identity disorder. I have 2 other people living in my brain rent-free, and it's pretty annoying at times. One is an egomaniac, and the other is a psychopath. You'll probably get to see them later too. From what I remember, their names are Shin and Hitoshi. Not that I'm looking forward to it at all. My dad was a well-known Chinese hero, but my mom was just quirkless, not that she wasn't a good person too. My dad's hero name was martial god, and for good reason. I learned about 5 forms of martial arts from him to defend myself, since we never knew if I had a quirk or not. And I also play piano if that matters at all. Other than that, and probably the most important part, I wanted to be a hero. To protect people and see the smiles on people's faces. I'd constantly go out of my way to cheer my classmates up and be supportive when I was little, and learning to fight so I could take care of my friends. I didn't care if I was quirkless or not. I knew that I was driven enough to help anyone. And maybe before I was. But things change. I changed. Taiyo. Stop rotting in the room and come down for dinner. Jolting out of his slumber for around the 5th time that weekend, he rubbed his eyes, looking around. It was near the end of summer. No normal teen would even clean their room at this time. Despite this, he was meticulously thorough with his room. All his clothes were folded and in drawers or a hamper beside his table. His bed was made, and nothing was strewn across the floor. Though, he did drool on his notebook a little. I should probably get that cleaned up. As he got wipes from his closet and cleaned his notebook, he thought about the past few days. It had been a long time since he got adopted by his friend's parents, and he wasn't mad. Jay was like a brother to him, despite how they met. And his parents, despite not being as well known as Taiyo's parents used to be, were still nice. In fact, that was his stepmom calling him earlier, Mrs. Hoshi. After wiping his face, attempting to wake up after the sudden intrusion to his relaxing evening, he threw on a t-shirt and ran down the steps to go get some food. As he descended the stairs and looked over at the table, he was greeted with the usual sight of Jay gorging everything that was given to him, not expecting anything different. Jay Hoshi was his stepbrother turned best friend, having been taken in by his family. He wasn't the most amazing guy, but he was genuine and driven when it came to music. They had been a duet online for a while with the rise of the internet, and now performed in person. Mr. and Mrs. Hoshi were talking in the other room, seeming slightly amused by Jay's consumption of the mountains of food he had amassed, using his quirk to enlarge some of the things on his plate for a bigger meal. "Hey Taiyo, you gotta come and eat this," Jay managed to say between bites. Despite his stuffed cheeks, he somehow managed to hold a casual conversation. This is seriously amazing. Half amused and half exasperated, Taiyo made his way to the table, sitting beside him as he began to eat. He wasn't really hungry but did his best to try and clean off his plate anyway. Jay looked over at the boy, seemingly perplexed as he swallowed what was left of his food. "You gonna eat that?" Jay asked, his mouth slightly watering at the food Taiyo had gotten. "Probably not." Without further hesitation, Jay slid his plate over, munching on the pork and rice Taiyo had been eating for dinner. As he began finishing up once more, he looked over at Taiyo, noting his distant gaze as he sat with his head in one hand, drumming the other on the table. Swallowing what was left, he put the food aside, catching on to Taiyo's demeanor. "It's about school, right? You haven't gone for a year. We can't afford to get you tested for a quirk now that you're older too, so applying to a hero school is risky. Taiyo nodded in response, not taking his eyes off of the tablecloth, making a soft hummed melody with the drumming of his fingers and his voice before responding. I don't really know if I want to either way. With this, Taiyo got Jay's full attention. Who in their right mind didn't want to be a hero? Especially given the chance to do so. But why not? Jay questioned a bit louder, seemingly befuddled by Taiyo's dismissive attitude towards the thought of hero school. I don't care how humble you want to be, you could knock a lot of those guys down a peg or two with how well you've been fighting. I mean, you've been training for years now. I don't think I've seen a better fighter when it comes down to hands and ages. You literally lifted our car to free a cat without a quirk. Do you know how crazy that is? Taiyo simply gave contemplative silence as an answer, taking a moment to gather his thoughts before speaking again. It's not like I hauled it up with one arm. Still took a lot of effort on my part. And I just don't think I can compete. After all, I still haven't finished making the martial arts style I wanted to do around a year and a half ago, he responded, keeping his tone down, unlike the bewildered brunette. Like that yin-yang thing. It suits you anyways, I could tell you made it just by looking at you, Jay retorted as he pointed at Taiyo's face smugly, noting his heterochromatic eyes. They were black and white, matching his black and white hair, the color of his braids split down the middle naturally, a gift from his parents. Taiyo rolled his eyes, unamused, though confirming his query. Yes, yin-yang. Shin and Hitoshi only know so much about martial arts, so asking them to write in my notebook usually lands me with no real helpful pointers. Not to mention I don't really trust Hitoshi out in public at all. Jay listened, seeming to start understanding what Taiyo was explaining. Well, are you making it for yourself? Or as a principal? Most fighting styles are supposed to be too, right? I mean, you're pretty consistent on that, but shouldn't that reflect in the actual fighting too? Taiyo paused for a moment, considering his words. It was true he was practicing, but he wasn't really reflecting that in his martial art. That's fair. But still, I don't think I should go. What if I end up mid-exam or something? I don't want people to see anything they don't understand. Especially not when I just moved here less than a few years ago. Jay seemed disappointed at his views, though he tried to reason with him a bit more, still confused at his point of view. Shin and Hitoshi aren't going to take over unless you get too emotional over something. And knowing you, you won't. But you need to open up sooner or later, man. I remember you calling me and telling me that you wanted to help others, the less fortunate, and make a world where everyone accepts everyone. You can't make that step if you aren't going to at least try to be. I started music with you just for the sake of it, and look at how far Indra and Azura came. Quirkless or not, just try. For us, Jay retorted, trying to get Taiyo to understand. After hearing his reasoning, despite not showing it visually, Taiyo seemed to flinch a little at the reminder. After some debate, looking down at his hand, he muttered his response, getting up to grab a coat and shoes. Fine. I'm in. A smoky encounter chapter text. Why does he need so many discs? We aren't even recording that much music as it is, Taiyo muttered as he walked out of a retail store in the city. Looking around, he realized how much farther he had traveled than before. He had usually stuck to urban areas, but the city was a nice change. Not counting the past few months, he had only really livened in forested or natural areas. Even their home was somewhat of a nature-oriented neighborhood. He recently agreed with Jay to take the entrance exam and maybe, just maybe, become a hero. Though he wasn't too sure he'd be chosen over all the kids with quirks, he still agreed, since he got Jay to do something similar with starting their duo band. He was Azura, and Jay was Indra. For teens, they were pretty popular. They even recently managed to fill venues they performed in now that Taiyo lived with Jay. However, as would be expected, it wasn't him performing, but Shin. Taiyo was far too reserved to go all out on the stage, so usually, Shin took over at concerts for Taiyo. As he went, he looked around, noticing all the bustling sounds of Mizudafu, the city he resided in. There was a bunch of commotion, and he could even see heroes dealing with a villain attack in the distance, and all the media as well as authorities preventing anyone from getting too close. As he wondered why there were a plethora of criminals trying to cause havoc, he suddenly noticed how deep into 𝗵𝘃𝗧𝗔𝗔 he was. How far did I even walk? After moving through the city, keeping his head down and covered by a hood to avoid much eye contact, he noticed what seemed to be sounds of distress from a playground nearby. Keeping his subtle demeanor and blending in, he walked towards the noise, noticing that smoke was billowing out of a nearby elementary school, and the people crowding around the outside didn't make it any better. He quickly moved closer, noticing the scream that came inside that seemed to be one of a teacher, and hesitated for a moment watching the scene. "What's going on?" Taiyo asked a bystander, seemingly growing impatient with the scenario and how little progress was being made. The man turned to him, seeming equally as concerned before answering. He seemed to be just as clueless as the boy. "There are lots of heroes fighting villains around the city. Seems like things are going on everywhere today, and this villain here seems to be trying to get ransom by holding these children hostage. Sick work if you ask me. Since the fires only happened a minute ago, no police are even bothering to come. Heroes usually take care of the initial work. Not a single firefighter in sight. Whatever happened to the old days?" The man, after responding, turned away to call the police, taking out his phone and frantically dialing emergency service. Once he was on the line, he looked back to where Taiyo was standing, seeking to reassure him that help was on the way. However, when he looked around, Taiyo was nowhere to be seen. As he rushed in, Taiyo flipped his hoodie inside out, the common attire that 𝗧𝗏, his stage name, wore in media posts, and crashed through a window as the public stayed oblivious to his intervention. As he landed inside one of the classrooms, he noticed that it seemed empty, though the class was just following their protocol. Noticing they were hidden away from the door and not trying to run, he concluded that someone was indeed most likely invading the school, as he paid no mind to them and walked into the hallway, shutting and barricading the door behind him. After tracing the smell of smoke around, the same eerie silence followed. It seemed like every single person in the school was either captured or hiding. Even though it was a rather large elementary school, it was still odd how there was almost no noise coming from around him at all. After a minute of walking, he heard the yelling of what seemed to be a little girl a few hallways away. "Stop it, please. Somebody help me." Without hesitation, Taiyo immediately ran towards the noise, set on protecting the child and getting them to safety. Once he rounded the corner and saw the scene, however, he instinctively ducked his head, barely avoiding being shot at point-blank range. He managed to catch a short glimpse of who fired the bullet beforehand, appearing to be an adult male. Had he not anticipated that gunshot, he may not have been lucky enough for it to go his way. Despite this, he noticed something important, as he ducked behind cover and put his hand up to his head. Where? There was no noise. He took his hand down, feeling blood running down his face, most likely having been grazed by the bullet. Despite this, his adrenaline and instincts started to kick in, and he was already too deep to back out. Either I'm deaf, or that gun isn't normal. I can hear my voice, so that means it's him, not me. If I hadn't heard anything on my way here, and even the sound of a firing gun made no noise, he looked up, noticing that the man was on top of him again. He had a mostly gruff appearance, being bald with a blonde beard and what seemed like gorilla gear, obviously stolen. He was about to hit him with a fire extinguisher, though Taiyo caught it and moved himself up from his resting position, throwing an axe kick at his chin as he made some distance between the two. "You're sneaky, but that's all you are. I don't need sounds to fight you." After hearing this, the man was angered, reaching for his belt. "You don't even have a quirk. How about this for sneaky, 𝗬𝗎𝗍𝗵𝗍?" However, this was exactly what Taiyo was looking for. Rushing him before he could reach for the gun in his belt, Taiyo twisted his hand and moved a fist into his gut, causing him to be taken aback and drop the weapon. About to switch back to a more conventional style of martial arts, he changed his mind, ducking behind the villain and wrapping his arms around his torso. He was about to bet all his cards on yin-yang, the fighting style he had just finished creating after years of effort earlier that day. Here goes nothing. After a moment, Taiyo lifted him, suplexing him onto the floor. This is where he would normally stop, but he forced himself to push past his comfort zone as he kicked up from that position, getting into a handstand. He wasn't a ballerina, but he demon sure felt like one. Once he successfully didn't fall flat on his face, He pushed himself away from the floor and into the air, twisting his body. After a moment, Taiyo landed another kick on his gut as he came down. After he looked down, about to continue, he noticed the man was already nearly done for, seemingly teetering in and out of consciousness. So that explains why he had a gun. But, unfortunately, my guns were bigger, Taiyo muttered with a small smile as he looked around, tying the villain to a pole with a multitude of jump ropes, restraining his ability to generate any force by tying his hands and feet. After a while, he spotted an injured child, rushing over to her and inspecting her injuries, while getting her to stop crying. He studied the child's appearance, her large green eyes studying his somewhat bloodied face due to the bullet scar he had just received, with her matching green hair in 2 low pigtails. He noticed how she had seemed to calm more after his joke and his small but caring smile, and after he wrapped the fabric from his around her leg, Taiyo helped her up. "What's your name, kiddo?" Taiyo responded as he led her towards the end of the school he entered from, letting her cling onto his breathed leg due to their height difference. She seemed in awe of how calm Taiyo was despite his obvious injury, attempting to console her even while in pain. After a few moments, she responded. "Satsuki, are you a hero?" she asked, still seeming a bit jarred from the incident. He flinched, remembering how he ended up here in the first place. He wasn't a hero. Hell, he wasn't even a hero student, he was just a guy. Not a quirk in sight. At least, not right then, but it didn't excuse him from endangering himself, so he could probably get a few weeks in some juvenile system for that on top of a vigilantism charge, and he didn't want that on his record after choosing the best hero school in the country to apply to. "Yeah," he replied, lying out of his teeth. "I'm the Zen hero, 𝗧𝗓𝗓. I'm new around here." He used his stage name given it was the first thing he could think of, but figured it would backfire on him sooner than later. This seemed like a satisfactory answer for the inquisitive Satsuki though, as she beamed with curiosity and appreciation, making sure to remember him for later. As he approached the window though, he noticed a sound. A familiar sound. Were those police sirens? Father of the Year chapter text, close one, Taiyo murmured, having carried Satsuki down the back end of the building and getting away before the police arrived. He wasn't one for suspicious activities, especially with an impressionable child in tow, but there was nothing else he could do to get himself out of the situation. He looked down at Satsuki, still using her tiny hands to cling onto Taiyo's shirt as he made his way out of school grounds without anyone in the crowd seeing him. A few heroes and the police could be seen moving in to investigate, but Taiyo knew that they wouldn't find much but an unconscious guy tied to a pole with a gun. "Are your parents nearby?" he asked the child, putting her down and getting on a knee to be around her level, though still taller than her. Satsuki shook her head, seeming a bit less distressed, albeit a bit shy. "No, Mama and Papa are still working. Wani-chan is taking care of us," she replied, slightly disappointedly. "And now I don't know where to go." Seeing the look on the young girl's face made Taiyo feel a sharp pang of both guilt and sympathy. On one hand, had he not intervened, the police most likely would have returned her home. But instead, she was here with him, a random person who knew nothing about the child. However, on the contrary, only having your sibling as a guardian seemed like a slightly sad upbringing. He thought for a moment, getting an idea and taking out his spare change from his pocket. Interesting," he started, looking at her saddened expression. After a moment, he got an idea, patting her head as he gave her a thumbs up, with the most comforting smile he could muster at the moment despite not being used to it. "Why don't we go get you something to eat before we take you home? You must be starving." Hearing his suggestion, Satsuki's eyes lit up, seeming thrilled by the idea. It was noon already, so it made sense that she would be hungry. "Yes. I mean," she replied, toning her energy down a bit and fiddling with her pigtails. "Yes, please." Seeing her energetic reaction, he figured it wouldn't hurt to serve as the child's caretaker until he managed to get her home. Taiyo stood up, allowing Satsuki to cling to his leg once more, walking into the city. "Well then, stay close to me. I'll make sure you get home safe." After a while, the two had found a restaurant to eat at. As Taiyo was about to go and fish his wallet out to find the money to pay for them, he picked up on the hostess' words as she spoke to him, unaware of him previously being completely ignorant to her talking. "And if you have any children with you, they eat for half the price today." It's Toddler Tuesday, so any kids under 10 can eat for half the price. Taiyo's initial distant expression turned into one of shock. That was a miracle. Restaurant tips cost him basically just as much as the meal. Oh yes, I'm bringing a child here today. I'm her legal guardian, he spurted, lying through his teeth for the second time that day. However, it was only a half-lie since he was technically her guardian for the time being until he got her home. Though at this rate he was about to become a lie machine before he even got to UA. Satsuki, on the other hand, had been waiting as she stared at the fish tank near the reception area. The child was completely enamored by the plethora of fish and the design of the tank itself. She had never seen any tank quite that large, and her small face was pressed against the glass until she heard Taiyo calling for her. Hey kiddo. Time to go. The little girl quickly detached her face from the fish tank, having been suctioned to the glass, and clinging to his side. She seemed to be reluctant to let him get too far, given how he was the only one he could trust in the vast city. The receptionist, upon seeing Satsuki's reaction, beamed at the sight and pointed to a table. We'll be right with you. Take your time, and enjoy 𝗵𝘂𝗧𝗵𝗲 delights. With that, the woman walked off and left the two. Her gaze lingered on Taiyo a bit longer as he took off his hood, not seeing anyone quite like him around. Taiyo, on the other hand, completely disregards her with a blank stare as he goes back to his usual detached demeanor. However, he let himself appear approachable enough for the child not to feel uncomfortable trying to talk to him. Satsuki seemed to be analyzing the silverware options in front of her, and the nicer layout with wide, sparkly eyes. It looked almost like she had never had fine dining in her life, but given what he knew about her so far, it checked out. You can get whatever you want, he offered, breaking his silence for a moment and handing her the children's menu. Just don't stuff yourself. Her face radiated at the news, her usually pout-shaped mouth forming into a small grin as she pointed to a jelly-based treat in the dessert section, causing him to internally scold himself for thinking she'd choose a normal meal. What was she, 6? He should have seen that coming a mile away. I guess I'll just get a shared meal. As a server came over to the two, watching Satsuki mindlessly playing with her utensils and Taiyo staring somewhere blankly, she couldn't help but just assume they were related even though they looked nothing alike. The way Taiyo handled her childish curiosity seemed a bit too familiar to be a coincidence, so she simply brushed off her suspicion and slight intimidation from Taiyo's demeanor and took their order. Excuse me, she started, attempting to get his attention. He peered over, his black and white eyes seeming to stare directly through her. His intimidating gaze seemed to leave her at a loss for words again before Taiyo softened his expression, replying to the young woman. Yes, sorry, can we just get a jelly donut with some sushi rolls and sashimi? That'll be all besides for some water, he requested, seeming no less blank than he did before, though with a hint of curiosity, as if he didn't just give her the coldest stare on earth. After becoming both mesmerized and unnerved at the same time, she walked away, taking their order. A few minutes and awkward encounters later, the server came back with their food. Upon seeing the jelly donut, Satsuki immediately got excited, taking a few bites and seeming extremely happy with herself. Seeing this, the server seemed slightly less nervous, knowing that the child was at least enjoying the food. Looking over at Taiyo, she noticed how he seemed to have a soft spot for the child, letting down his standoffish demeanor for the sake of her comfort. So he's not just some odd recluse. Before she could find the time to appreciate his inner softness, he looked over at her, his expression immediately changing back to the blank and distant one that he had given her at first. Being slightly intimidated, though also understanding him a bit more, she gave a quick nod, attempting to look in the other direction. If you need anything else, don't hesitate to ask, she spurted out, turning away quickly and leaving the two unlikely companions to their meal. As he walked out of the city, Satsuki trailed shortly behind him, still holding onto his ripped breathed leg. Taiyo still couldn't believe he ruined perfectly good sweatpants in less than a week, though it patched her up, so he didn't mind. As he made it to the rural area of 𝗵𝘂𝗧𝗵𝗲, he looked around, searching for her residence. He didn't expect to be spending his day of relaxation babysitting someone's child. Not to mention, he still had to train for that day, so he had to make sure that he got her home soon. Do you know where your street is? Did your parents ever teach you? He asked, seeming a bit tired. They had been walking for a while, and while Satsuki had been getting piggyback rides every once in a while to let her rest, he was not as lucky. Not to mention only having treated his bullet wound with alcohol from a corner store and a band-aid. Satsuki, however, seeming slightly guilty about his exertion though still happy, shrugged and gave him a sleepy response. I know my neighbors, she mumbled, attempting to keep up. It was clear that the child was as tired as he was, though not physically, just mentally. A nap would be nice right now, but I don't want to look like a homeless person. As they walked, he resorted to simply knocking on every door in the area. One was an old couple, delighted to have unexpected company and offering them a treat. Others, however, were busy families, and upon talking with the two, thanked them for clearing up the misunderstanding and went back to their business. For some reason, something nestled deep in the back of his subconscious started to ache observing the multiple families, his hurt being noticeable to even the young Satsuki. Mr. 𝗔𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲, are you okay? Satsuki queried, looking up at him as she clung to him with one hand. Hearing Satsuki snapped him out of his momentary bind, rubbing his head and looking forward, hiding his expression from the girl. I'm fine, Satsuki. As he continued forward, he saw a doormat that read Azui Residence. Remembering that her locker read Satsuki Azui, he led her over to the door, looking down at her. Tell your sister that a hero took you home, okay? He said with a smile as he patted her head one last time. Just know that 𝗔𝗂𝘁𝗓 is always there to look after you. After this, he knocked on the door, detaching Satsuki from his side and pushing her towards the doorway. After a moment, footsteps could be heard inside, and all of a sudden, the doorway swung open. Clad in an apron and casual clothes, having been cooking for her family, Tsuyu Azui opened the door to find her little sister standing there alone with bright eyes and a patched-up knee, looking happy despite her condition. As he entered the door to his house again, Yorohoshi, his adoptive mother, immediately came running. He had been out since that morning, and it was already nightfall at this point. Taiyo had never been out that long since he moved in with his friend, and his parents were just as protective over him as they were of Jay. Oh my God. Taiyo, where were you? You never called, and it's been hours for God's sake. And your head? She cried, looking at the still raw scar from the bullet that grazed him. It reached from the side of his nose slightly diagonal up his forehead, past his braids that covered most of his face. After hearing her shrieks, Jay came down the stairs in his pajamas and a guitar pick in his hands, seeming tired. He looked at the scene, and despite the injury on Taiyo, he seemed a lot calmer than her. Don't overexert yourself, Ma. He's not dying, he said as he got her to take a seat and calm down, walking over to Taiyo. He looked at his appearance, noting that he flipped his hoodie inside out, and the rip on his, what happened to you? Street fight or something? He questioned, seeming intrigued at his current state. He looked more like he went to an underground fighting ring than out for cassette tapes and music discs. I'll tell you later, he said as he took off his hoodie, rubbing his neck. A lot of things happened today. I still need to train too. But I think I might not pass up on that entrance exam after all. Big Stepper's chapter text. As Taiyo approached UA to do the practical test, he looked around, noting all the different people. He passed the writing test and was ready to try as best as he could, having recovered from the attack on the school he had intervened in. Walking up to the building, he marveled at the sheer size of the place, not seeing anything like it in the vicinity. He didn't have any academic uniforms for Japan, so he simply came in a full black Chinese Nehru jacket. He didn't have many things left from his old home life in China, but he figured that everyone would be confused thinking he was an American transfer, due to his hairstyle and his overall dark skin tone. While he didn't expect people to think he was an Eastern native, he couldn't help but feel both a sense of familiarity and isolation wearing the jacket. As he got inside and sat down for the briefing of the test, he looked around. A lot of people there seemed shorter than him, which he expected, though very few people there seemed particularly weak at all, so he figured it would be a fun time. He wasn't abnormally strong, though he was certainly strong enough to fool people into thinking he had some enhancement quirk. Another benefit of molding your body since childhood. The density of his muscles also increased after training to fight extremely young, due to his muscle fibers just constantly being strained and having to grow. In a sense, he evolved naturally. However, while he was zoning out, listening to 𝗵𝗃, the examiner, go over the test, he heard a voice and saw a raised hand. Deciding to pay just a bit more attention, he finally diverted his eyes to the current matter. I specifically remember you listed 4 types of villains, not 3. A boy with blue hair and glasses questioned, seeming serious. So if there are 1, 2, and 3-point robots, what is the last one? And you, with the unkempt green hair, he continued, pointing his finger at a smaller boy with the same hair described. You've been muttering this whole time, so unless you aren't going to take this seriously, cut it out. 𝗵𝗃 answered enthusiastically after the short wave of laughter, pointing to the screen with a short demonstration. I was just getting to that. Those are called 0-point robots. Think of them as obstacles less than enemies. It'd be wise to stay out of the way. We simply use them to see how you utilize your quirks under a high-stakes scenario. Taiyo seemed especially intrigued at that, though seeming as if they didn't expect any of them to beat it. He figured it would be best to stay out of their way. As soon as he was about to actually plan, however, the briefing ended, with everyone leaving to get ready for the test. Well, it's time. At least we're not allowed to attack each other, right? He told himself as he got up, getting ready to either pass or fail as everything snowballed into oblivion. As he approached the battle center outside that he was assigned to, he noticed everyone already there, waiting. He had only changed into a black and white sweater that matched his hair and eyes, with white and a black belt from martial arts tied around his waist. He wasn't going to steal a design from his genetic father's hero costume, so he decided not to wear an entire martial arts outfit. As he approached the giant metal doors, he noticed how eager everyone was to get started, having been waiting for a long time. After a moment, he noticed his shoes were untied, going down to tie them again. Though as if the very universe were against him, the moment he undid the knots and began tying, a horn sounded as 𝗵𝗃 yelled from his perch atop the large walls surrounding the mock city. There's no countdown for a real battle. Get going. Before he could make any sounds or gestures of protest, the doors swung open and everyone ran through. His expression fell, his eyes popping out of their sockets as he managed to tie his shoe and get up. 𝗳𝗵𝗵 meanwhile, 𝗧𝗵𝗵 𝗔𝗂𝗧𝗔𝗵𝗄 was having his own troubles as he attempted to get into action. He was the same green-haired boy that was called out in the briefing, muttering the entire time. He was what most people called a fangirl when it came to heroes. Originally quirkless before being bestowed the power of one for all, he tried his absolute hardest to become the greatest hero. Though all the training he did to be able to harness that power seemed useless now, as he stood frozen in front of a 2-point robot. As it was about to attack, someone came behind Deku, tripping him and causing him to fall to the floor. As he landed with a thud, Deku looked up to see a boy with split black and white hair and eyes holding the arm of the robot, not letting it go. After a few seconds, he tugged at it, causing the metal to start creaking and eventually tear. With the robotic arm now his, he ripped out all the electronics and used it as a sort of brass knuckle, tearing out the components from a weaker area. That's 45, he said, dropping the casing. As he looked down at Izuku, he seemed intrigued, giving him a blank stare. You're gonna fail at this rate, man. Come on, he said, picking him up. Despite Midoriya protesting frantically as he picked him up and put him on his back, he didn't really do much to stop it. After all, if what he said was true, he had dismantled about 20 other robots in the same manner and didn't even seem tired. As he gave him a glorified piggyback ride and dashed off, Midoriya noticed how much faster the guy was than himself. He was already pretty tall, but being athletic to this degree was insane. Do you have some sort of enhancement ability? He asked, making sure not to fall or be a burden as they dashed past, with the boy kicking down multiple other robots, not showing any sign of pain from doing so. Nope, the boy replied, dusting off his and looking around. No quirk, actually. At least not that I know of. You can just call me Taiyo. Hearing this, Deku's eyes widened. Quirkless? No, that couldn't be right. He just managed to tear steel. And he's running way faster than a normal person could, not counting the boy with thrusters on his legs who ran a lot faster than him. What? Izuku muttered, seemingly confused by the revelation. If he was really quirkless, then how did he get this strong? It made no sense in his eyes, Quirks were what made someone strong. So how was he still holding his own? How did you do that? Izuku continued, raising his voice a little so he could be heard. Defeat the robot? Sensing his disbelief, Taiyo rubbed his temple, giving him a watered-down answer. In my village in China, they had no tech to check for quirks. So my dad taught me to fight instead. As kids, we usually play around and have fun, but after I accidentally injured someone on accident as a kid, my dad thought that I was strong enough to protect myself if I just did martial arts and always trained. I followed a schedule and never went off schedule, always training. And that's it. Taking in the tidbit of information, Midoriya thought for a minute, deducing that if what he said was true then he would be on another level than most people in the exam at that time. Still, being able to tear steel requires a bit more strength than just being strong. And then he remembered his eyes. His right eye, being the white side for both his hair and clothes, started turning black, and his expression flashed to one that was smirking instead of his now calm and neutral demeanor. What was that about? That wasn't normal at all, and it didn't even seem like the Taiyo carrying him now. He seemed a lot more intimidating in that moment. Before he could think more about it, however, he saw the nice girl he met earlier trapped under rubble, pointing her out. "Hey!" Izuku exclaimed, pointing to Uraraka. "She's in trouble. We can't just leave her there." "Yeah, but there's a lot of other problems to deal with right now," Taiyo replied, looking up at the 0-point robot. He thought it would be a bit less intimidating, or possibly just slightly smaller than the towering robot above them. He let Izuku off his back, about to go run past the robot. "Listen, you get her out of there, and I'm going to go get a few other people out of here," he said as he started running off. Despite his initial distant and neutral demeanor, he seemed like an overall good person to Izuku. Though not wasting any more time, he ran over to Ochako. After a moment, he saw a handful of students fighting multiple 2- or 3-point robots, running ahead of the 0-pointer. "Hui," he yelled, trying to get their attention before the robot caught up, its giant strides making it strong to keep his lead. "Robot here. Like, big robot. Get out of here." Most of the people fighting immediately stopped after defeating their robots, looking over where he was. Trailing directly behind him was a massive 0-point robot, the same one that they released in every other sector, this one being their 0-point robot. A lot of people ran away, and those who stood frozen, Taiyo knocked out of the way before running forward, attempting to clear the way. After a while, he saw a girl in what seemed to be normal school clothes, with long green hair that went into a bow-like shape at the end. From what he saw, she looked a lot like she had a frog quirk. Though she didn't look too much like one, not counting the long tongue tossing around robots as she hopped around. After a moment though, she had gotten blindsided, getting knocked around by 3-point robots, as the 0-pointer arrived. Not wasting any time, he picked up a slate of concrete, flexing and tossing it at the robot's exposed parts. It hit it in some exposed wire on the neck, causing it to fall, disabled as she had time to take down the other 2 robots. After he helped her, the girl waved at him, seemingly grateful for the help though a bit banged up. Thanks for the help, stranger. I was a bit occupied there, Carol." Taiyo gave a nod, seemingly glad that she was okay, though still wearing a relatively neutral expression. Surprisingly, the girl had a similarly blank expression, though it seemed less intentional and a lot less intimidating or concerning than his. "Of course," he said, waving it off and about to walk away. "You were in pretty deep, you know. At least I can warn the 𝗧𝗏." He stopped, his eyes widening as he slowly looked up and the realization dawned on him. Warn the others about the 0-point robot. It should have closed the gap by now. As he looked up, he saw a leg lifting into the air, as their area slowly darkened. Oh, yet before Tsuyu and himself got crushed, he picked her up without warning and slid, managing to just barely avoid the 0-point robot. He could hear the sounds of people yelling and running away, most likely the other students. "Where is the DM and exit?" Taiyo muttered, still struggling to keep his lead with the robot attempting to smash its fists and feet on the 2. He was already too far in the zone to be overly scared now, and adrenaline had long since taken over. Tsuyu, still in his arms, looked up at the boy. She was still in shock from how quickly everything was happening, but she noticed the serious look on his face as he attempted to get them both away. At the very least, she was able to confirm he didn't have any ill intent with her, though it didn't help her to calm down any less. As 𝗧𝗏 tried clearing the way using her tongue, she peered up at him for a short moment. While he ran, the wind blew his split-colored hair upwards, revealing his bullet scar before his braids covered it again. She seemed curious for a moment, though remembered what happened in the previous weeks. As she continued trying to support Taiyo as he ran, she recalled fretting over her little sister. She had been extremely worried when she learned that the people who fled outside the school didn't include her, while an unknown hero apprehended the man who had gone in, though opened her door an hour later to see Satsuki alone on the doorstep. When she asked her how she got home, Satsuki mentioned a nice hero who beat up the bad guy and gave her something to eat, taking her home. While she didn't know his name, Satsuki referred to him as Mr. Azura, and she mentioned him being tall and having a scar from fighting the bad guy. Looking at his scar, it lined up exactly with what she described. A scar from his nose to his forehead, as well as matching the other descriptors like black and white eyes. So you're the one, she thought, looking at him. He seemed well-intentioned enough, and calm under pressure, though she still couldn't ignore the fact he just waltzed around with his little sister, even if he had little other choice than to leave her in a building with a dazed villain. Before she could act though, he looked around the corner as he passed a section, seeing a second 0-point robot. What the hell? Taiyo muttered, trying to formulate a plan in his head. There should only be one 0-pointer. Why is it here? Did they lie? Either way, I can't stop, or we'll get crushed. And if I continue, we'll get crushed. He looked forward, his eyes lighting up as he saw his one out, turning his head down to 𝗧𝗏. Sorry for picking you up like that. And sorry for what I'm about to do. But my priority is the lives of others, so what do you say I give you a better apology later? Go get out of here, he said, giving the faintest smile before prying her hold off of himself and tossing her away. His strength was enough to toss her out of the direction of the 0-point robots for a short while, buying her time. The last thing 𝗧𝗏 saw was him rushing for a specific area out of view, as the robot's foot landed on its mark. 𝗧𝗏 looked at the area the robot stepped on, seeming mortified for a short while before taking his advice and getting away, using her tongue to latch onto buildings and hop away. And I didn't even get a name gutter ball chapter text. The first place student didn't even have rescue points, a teacher remarked as they looked at the results for the practical exam. He focused solely on taking down robots. Another mentioned, watching footage of a blonde-haired boy with crimson eyes run through the exam, using an explosion like Quirk. Not only that, when the other examinees were running from the big obstacles, he stayed focused on the other ones, counterattacking as needed. Impressive. And on the contrary, the 7th place student had no villain points. A voice called out, impressed by the placement. A video flashed onto the screen with Izuku saving the girl he met previously, Ochako Uraraka, and defeating one of the giant robots shortly after. He's not the first lunatic to take out that 0-point robot. Though it's been a while since I've seen someone take it out in one blow, but at what cost? A female teacher responded, questioning the motive. That kid got seriously injured. It doesn't even seem like he's used to his quirk yet. There was a brief back and forth between the voices, with all the examiners seeming to have mixed opinions on the boy. A teacher in the back, with long black hair and a tired expression, listened with a small sense of intrigue. The fact he took down one of the 0-point robots was an impressive feat on its own, injury or not. After a minute of debacle, another voice called out. But what about this kid, he asked, a video flashing on the screen with Taiyo saving Midoriya and ripping a robot's arm off, using it as a way to damage it. He doesn't look like he has some conventional quirk. All he's been doing is fighting like how some boxer would, with little help. Even still, he was quick enough to outpace a 0-point robot and save a girl in the process. Twice. Another video flashed up with Taiyo using concrete to make one of the robots disable when they were attacking 𝗧𝗏 and save her from being stomped on by 2 0-point robots. The video had a rough angle of Taiyo running forward, and shortly after getting crushed by the robot's feet after tossing her out of the way. What's the verdict on that kid? Placement and status, another questioned, seeming intrigued by his performance. Did nobody notice that a quirkless person had signed up for the practical test? You realize how seriously dangerous this type of exam would be for him, right? We could have sent him to an easier sector, where there weren't as many 0-pointers and 3-pointers, or dash. Third place, another answered, bringing back up the standings. 47 villain points and 50 rescue points. Right behind 𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗏 with 49 villain points and 50 rescue points. Subsequently, 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝗲 is in first, his placement having been explained prior. There was a short wave of surprise among the examiners as they listened to the boy's placement among the others. They were surprised, bewildered even that a possibly quirkless kid had managed to rank so high. They expected him to fall on the lower end, if he got any villain points at all. However, that begged the question of whether or not he even walked out of the exam alive. And his status? Manholes are probably some of the most useless inventions that humanity has ever made. What purpose do they even serve? They let you get into a sewage system. That's it. And if you were wondering, at the end of most cities, there are large exits to the sewers that you can just walk straight into. Most of them have gates. Also, nobody likes running over manhole covers. It's a horrible experience. You tell me that you like the feeling of gambling on whether or not the manhole will damage your tires. With that said, I thank whoever invented these useless contraptions, because they're the only reason that I'm not a flattened pancake right now. As he trudged through the dark passage, walking along the small ledge, Taiyo thought about how he got to this point. He was supposed to have just been dismantling robots safely, accumulating villain points. Instead, he decided to risk himself for 2 people. Not that Izuku's rescue wasn't his intention, but he had intentionally rushed the similarly green-haired girl to safety despite her obvious competence when it came to mobility. He almost died protecting a girl. Who was he, Shin? Yep, you are. Well, technically, I'm you, and you're not me. Specifics are complicated, but you aren't as much of a charmer as me. We know that, you dumbass. Why do you act like this is his first time hearing us? And that was a rhetorical thought. You didn't have to respond. And then it got worse. This was probably the first time they'd all talked together in a while, with Shin being the one in his subconscious for the most part, due to taking over at concerts and giving him general advice, with Hitoshi simply staying dormant unless he was brought out by any strong negative feeling. Turns out, this included a love for battle. This was the same reason his right eye kept darkening from a white to a grayish color, outlined with black, whenever he tried dismantling robots. Hitoshi, as he claimed, had a lot more raw power than Taiyo did, so when he took over, Taiyo by extension got stronger. Why this happened? He had no idea. He figured it was because Taiyo's personality wasn't nearly as ruthless or aggressive as Hitoshi's. Although, as far as he knew, they were both alternate personalities, so he remained entirely befuddled by the situation. Can you guys not do this right now? He questioned, looking around for light. If you didn't notice, I'm trying to find an exit. And you also actually allowed this dipshit to convince you to save someone you probably didn't even need to save. You saw how she was handling herself. The only reason she needed our help was because she wasn't paying attention, all thanks to that stupid warning of yours. And then you let Shin guide you and hold her like she's some sort of princess. Who are you? Captain 𝗧𝗵𝗲. Okay, Shin interrupted, not letting Hitoshi finish. Give the kid a break. It was mostly me in control and she was injured. She had a frog quirk, not some rock-strong skin. Getting hit by steel is bound to hurt her. It took Taiyo 5 months to stop complaining when he punched metal. He wouldn't stop crying about how his fingers hurt. Taiyo flinched at the reminder, getting increasingly annoyed at their bickering. Getting onto the pole of the railing, and jumping to the other side to continue where the walkway stopped, he noticed a light in the distance. Can you guys shut up? I don't want to be talking to myself when we're outside, he said, approaching the dim light and confirming that it was a manhole exit as he tested the ladder. Sure, Aquaman. Why don't you go give her the proper apology you promised while you're at it? Hitoshi retorted, exasperated at the predicament that Taiyo had put them in. Taiyo, hearing this, stopped for a moment. He had said that, didn't he? Shin had nothing to do with that. It came straight from him. Looks like you struck a nerve, Toshi, Shin remarked, as Taiyo all of a sudden stopped responding. I don't think he liked that very much. Or maybe he did and he's just embarrassed. Anyway, don't worry about him, buddy. You get us out of here. Climbing the ladder, already done with sewers for a lifetime, he was going to do exactly that. After trying to move it, he realized that the cover was loosely screwed into the ground. Determined to get out, he repeatedly hit the manhole cover until it was knocked out of the way, peeking out. And as if he wasn't embarrassed enough, all the other 10 contestants from another sector, having gathered a foot away, stared back. You know you're gonna scare Mom half to death if you keep pulling stunts like this, right? Jay said, leaning on the door outside the bathroom as Taiyo was washing off the scent of sewer water inside. Taiyo had told him about the test, and he didn't need to tell their mom, due to the school calling and informing them of his possible disappearance right as he walked through the door. I know that, he responded through the door, seemingly exhausted as he could be heard sighing through the walls. It's not like I wanted any of that to happen. How the hell was I supposed to know there was more than one? That it was going to be right next to me, for God's sake. I know, but if you would have paid attention, you might have been more informed. You can't figure out everything the moment you start, Jay responded, putting a hand over his face. And what am I even supposed to do about those two? He continued desperately, not seeming to notice the actual meaning of Jay's words. One basically saw me swap personalities in the middle of a fight, and the other just had to sit awkwardly in my arms for a minute. I mean, how am I supposed to make a good impression if the two people I got to meet had that impression of me? How am I going to seem normal? Jay finished, knowing very well Taiyo's train of thought by now. There was a wave of silence, with nothing but the sounds of creaking boards and crickets in the night. The shower ran true, water hitting the floor in thousands of hot droplets, and running down the drain, a point of no return. After a few minutes, the water stopped, and Jay heard the familiar pitter-patter of wet feet moving across the tile floor. Soon after, he exited the room in a checkered towel, holding his bonnet as his hair covered his expression. We can talk about this tomorrow. As he got his things, 𝗧𝗓𝗄, his adoptive father, helped him get ready and put on his uniform for his first day at UA. He already knew how to tie a tie and everything else that had to do with formal wear, though it gave him a sense of pride due to it being his first day of school in Japan. After all, his friend's parents were the obsessive type. You know, if you wanted to strike up a conversation with that girl, you can always ask me for pointers if you see her at UA today, 𝗧𝗓 said as he tossed the soft fabric of his red tie over his neck, making sure that it was neatly tied. He worked the crimson silk around Taiyo's collar, making a neat eldridge knot around his neck and standing back, admiring his suit as 𝗎𝗓 took a handful of photos. I don't need help, I was just getting rescue points, Taiyo replied blankly, brushing off the shoulders of his gray and green suit jacket. It was strong finding a size for a first year, due to his taller stature. Jay, having been leaning on the wall observing, patted his shoulder and chuckled. Sure man, but just tell me if you get any sly looks. I'll deal with those stuck up if I have to, he said proudly as he flexed his arms, using his enlarged quirk to make his arms and biceps grow. And don't let school stop you from writing songs. We aren't going on tour anymore, but we do still have performances, you know. Indra and 𝗎𝗓 stopped for no one. Jay continued as he put an arm around his shoulder. You're still taking photos? What do you mean? Taiyo asked, finally cracking a faint smile. I never stop. New Beginnings chapter text Izuku Midoriya, a 15-year-old boy who was short in stature but tall in aspirations, made his way into UA for his first day. He was also the same boy that Taiyo had helped, and who destroyed the 0-point robot. Similarly to Taiyo, he had made it into the school, just barely passing due to his impressive feats and outstanding rescue points. His tie wasn't even knotted correctly, however, he was still eager to get to class and start his journey as a hero student. Class 1A, where is it? Midoriya mumbled, running through the halls with various doors leading to classrooms. The school was vast, and he had no semblance of the layout. As he progressed, he noted to himself to be earlier next time, as he would be able to spend more time finding his class. Moments later, he stumbled upon a large door, with 1A inscribed in large red characters on its surface. So this is it, huh? The door is pretty large, he commented to himself. The greatest students from around the country are all going to be here. After mentioning it, a brief vision of the uptight blue-haired boy and his explosive blonde-haired childhood friend, 𝗏𝗏, flashed in his head. He was less of a childhood friend than a childhood bully, as he consistently looked down on those he thought were lesser than himself, and Izuku was his favorite target. But because until recently, when he became the next user of a powerful quirk, one for all from the number one hero himself, he was quirkless. He quickly shook the thought out of his head as he pushed open the door. No, there's no way that those two are in the same class as me, right? He told himself as he pushed open the door. I'm going to need you to take your feet off that desk now. It's the first day of school and you're already disrespecting this academy by scuffing school property, a blue-haired boy with glasses exclaimed, as he put a hand out while pointing at the desk. Sitting on that same desk, his feet kicked up onto the surface, was Katsuki Bakugo. You're kidding me, he responded with a wide and sadistic grin, looking up at the boy. Do you have a stick up your butt or something? Midoriya, watching the scene, wore an expression of defeat knowing that both the boys that gave him trouble were the first that he saw while standing in the doorway. Look, let's start over. I'm 𝗧𝗵𝗲, he proclaimed, putting his hand over his 𝗧𝗓𝗧. I'm from the 𝗬𝗵𝗲 Private Academy. 𝗬𝗵𝗲? Bakugo replied, seeming less than delighted. Well, that explains a lot. You must think you're hot stuff, huh? I'm gonna have fun with you. Before Ida had a chance to respond, he noticed Izuku in the doorway, seeming surprised. Everyone else also turned their heads as they saw him. It's Utes. He marched towards him, catching Midoriya off guard as he began to introduce himself once again. Hi, I'm 𝗧𝗵𝗲. I know, thanks. I'm Izuku Midoriya. Nice to meet you, Midoriya stuttered, embarrassed by the sudden attention. Though once he was cut off, he gave a thoughtful expression as he explained his sudden introduction. Midoriya, you must have known there was something more to the practical exam, didn't you? He started, as the green-haired boy knew exactly what he meant. He had saved someone by taking down the 0-point robot, though he didn't really do too hot after that. I have completely misjudged you, I admit. As a student, you are far better than me. I find that strong to believe, he responded internally, befuddled at Ida's sudden kindness. However, a moment later, another voice rang out. Hey, I recognize that voice anywhere. Falling guy. A girl with brown hair and eyes exclaimed, seeming excited to see him. That was Achiko Uraraka, the girl that used her zero-gravity quirk to save him, and the same one he saved in turn from the 0-point robot. As she talked, and complimented how he handled the entrance exam, he couldn't help but admire her internally, still completely shy around her. Oh my god. She's actually talking to me. She looks amazing in that uniform. As Bakugo watched the exchange between the two, he couldn't help but sneer at the sight of Deku being in the class with him. He was supposed to be the first one from their shoddy school to go to UA, so why did he have to make it too? He couldn't understand how he possibly passed, knowing how weak the boy used to be. He would know he always bullied him and took advantage of that. But his demeanor lately had changed. After a second, someone tapped Izuku's shoulder, causing his embarrassment to be momently distracted. As he looked to his right, Taiyo stood in the doorway with a neutral expression, giving him a wave. I heard about what you did, Taiyo responded, giving him a nod. Nice work. After seeing him, the entire class went dead silent as they processed his presence. You're alive. Ida exclaimed, horrified and bewildered. But you never came you never came out. Midoriya finished, seeming confused as he held his head, processing the state of the boy in front of him. They said that a quirkless person that signed up for the exams went missing after the second 0-point robot was released. How are you here? Taiyo didn't show any facial response to this, though he ran his hand through his black and white hair, sighing. A manhole cover got slid open. I went into a sewage system. A few wrong turns, and I ended up in a completely different testing area. The three took a moment to process this, with Achiko's only real familiarity with the boy being a statement they put out after testing and people's experiences on the matter. Before she could input anything, a boy with spiky red hair walked up to Taiyo, punching him in the gut and patting his shoulder. While he seemed completely unfazed, he internally cursed the boy for punching him so strong as he wasn't expecting it, causing his stomach pain. That's pretty demon cool, man, he exclaimed, giving a wide grin as he put a thumb to his tea. Choosing to save someone over yourself and still being confident you'll live is super manly. You're cool in my book. The name's 𝗧𝗪 Kirishima. Taiyo rubbed his stomach, nodding as he took the compliment. He was more than happy for someone to at least think of him in a positive light, considering how they treated quirkless people and darker people of his nature at his last school. Yeah, thanks, she stopped, noticing a flaw in that sentence. There was footage of the exam, sure, but how did he know about that? About what he said to that girl? There was no way any camera could have picked up on that whispered promise. By the way, Taiyo continued, seeming a bit more pensive. How'd you hear about that? Oh, it was nothing. One of the contestants came out super sad, and when I asked them what was wrong, they just Achiko quickly covered Kirishima's mouth as she chuckled nervously, filling in for him. We just heard it when we saw the footage of the exam. It was super quiet, but we managed to hear it, having gotten to know some of her classmates over the weekend due to talking to each other after the exams. She already knew that Tsuyu greatly appreciated him and also suspected that he helped her sister as well. If he knew that she told people about what he said, she was confident it would change his already scarce views on the girl. While she wasn't one to butt in like that, she knew that she couldn't just let him sit around with the thought that Tsuyu had told someone about what seemed to be personal for a reserved person like him. If you came here to make friends, I suggest you leave now. Welcome to UA's hero course. Taiyo looked over to the door where the voice came from, as all but he were visibly shocked at the sight. A man with long black hair and tired eyes lay in a yellow sleeping bag in the hallway, pulling the zipper down and inhaling a pack of applesauce. In truth, Jay did many more odd things around the house, so he wasn't surprised by this. It took too long for you all to shut up. That's not going to work. Rational people would understand that time is valuable. I'm your teacher, Eraserhead. He kept his introduction brief, taking out a bag. Ignoring or perhaps oblivious to everyone's shocked faces, he pulled a uniform out, showing the blue, white, and red athletic uniform to the class. Put these on and come with me. A Quirk assessment test, everyone said collectively, intrigued at the sudden nature of this examination. We're gonna miss the ceremony, Uriaraka exclaimed, upset by the thought. If you want to make it big, there's no time to waste on pointless celebrations, Eraserhead responded, staring out at the field. We're not tethered to traditional norms, so that means I can run my class in any way I see fit. You've been taking all these standardized tests before, but I'm sure you've never been allowed to actually use your quirks in a physical exam. The country is pretending that we're all equal by not letting the powerful excel, but one day they'll learn. It's not rational. Taiyo stayed silent as he listened to his words. As much as everyone would love to deny it, the world isn't fair like that. Powerful quirks give you an instant lead over others, and let you grow quickly. However, Bakugo, Eraserhead continued, turning towards him. You got the most points in the exam. How far was your softball throw in your previous school? The blonde seemed surprised at the question, not expecting to have been asked such an unordinary question. 67 meters. Around that distance. Now try throwing the ball using your quirk. Anything goes as long as you throw from the circle. Bakugo was curious, though did as Aizawa instructed and stepped into the circle. I'll add some heat to this throw and leave these losers slack-jawed. After stretching and a lot of prodding from the impatient Eraserhead, he threw the ball with immense force, going 705. 2 meters. These tests are the best way to figure out the true extent of your quirk as a pro hero, Eraserhead mentioned after showing the score. There was a wave of surprise among the class, with some seeming surprised at Bakugo's distance and others excited for their turn. Taiyo stayed completely silent, still stuck on the fact that he was literally being tested on the past 8 years of effort he's put into becoming strong. Fun. Eraserhead responded, confused. Really? Do you think this is going to be enjoyable? You have 3 years to become a hero. Do you really think this is all going to be fun and games? As Eraserhead talked, Taiyo looked over at Deku, surprised at how anxious he seemed. He tapped him on the shoulder, causing Deku's head to snap back in surprise, small beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Taiyo just gave him a thumbs up and went back to idling until it was his time to go. It's a hero's job to combat unfairness. UA will throw hardship after hardship, so do your best. Enough talking, let's start. All the students were motivated and willing to do whatever it took to prove themselves. However, Taiyo simply sat behind everyone, still trying to come up with a plan. Once again, Before he could finish any real valid thoughts, they were interrupted as their teacher called for the test to begin. The test started, and Ida and Tsuyu were the first to do the 50-meter dash. While the latter got a reasonable 5:58 seconds, Ida managed to almost beat 3 seconds with his quirk, engine, allowing him immense speed. Ochako made use of her zero-gravity quirk to make it easier to run, though still ended up getting 7:15 seconds. As everyone went, it was time for Taiyo to go, and Eraserhead noticed the questionable lack of preparation, as he just stepped up to the line. Normally, an emitter would use their quirk to help gain speed or alter their body to run faster, but he did neither. Either way, he still beat mostly everyone with a time of 4.5 seconds, only falling short of Bakugo and Ida. That doesn't seem like any quirk related to speed. He might have a weight-related quirk, similar to that brown-haired girl. As the tests went on, this trend continued, with him doing surprisingly good in every category, but not having anything he was inherently better at. He even managed to exude 230 kilograms of force on the grip test, shocking most people there considering they saw little quirk-related shenanigans involved, though he did not come in first. After this, Eraser realized that he was the exact same person who they mentioned getting crushed by the robot and fighting normally, with no visible quirk in sight. He hadn't paid much attention due to the other two's impressive feats. He's not sensational by any means, but this much raw power is nearly impossible for a normal human though. It's just barely in the realm of possibility that it's still believable. After a while, Izuku utilized One for All to throw just 1 decimal higher than Bakugo, as Taiyo was the last one to go for the last test of the day. He looked down at the ball, weighing his options, before turning to Eraserhead. "You said anything goes," he questioned, the right side of his hair starting to darken. Despite being extremely perplexed at his physical change, and taken slightly aback by the sudden shift in his voice mid-sentence, he affirmed the question. "Yes, as long as you stay in the circle." On the other side of things, Ochako was talking to Taiyo, conversing about the recent discovery of Taiyo not being crushed. "It's okay if you couldn't approach him, I was just as shocked. It took everything I had to try and stop Kirishima from talking." Tsuyu was reluctant to accept the fact she couldn't properly thank him for helping her out so often despite not knowing her at all, but eventually, she relented. "It's not like I'm telling him a secret. I just was too shocked to even give a proper response." Before she finished, Tsuyu doubled back to the throwing circle, not believing what she was seeing. Ochako noticed her sudden shift in attention and was curious about what was going on, since everyone else was murmuring too. As she looked where the mesmerized Tsuyu was staring, she saw Taiyo with pitch-black hair and eyes, a lazy though unnerving smile on his face as he prepared to throw the ball. "So you're just going to let him have at it then?" Shin asked as Taiyo fully relented control of his body to Hitoshi. "Yeah. You got it from here," he replied, his response monotone, waiting for a follow-up. After what seemed like ages, Hitoshi responded as he prepared to throw the ball. "Well, it's not like I don't want to. Unfair. 𝗧𝗧𝗏, we've seen enough of unfairness for a lifetime. Let's see what your limits are, and break them just like before." Fisticuffs chapter text. Eraserhead, a voice called out as the teacher walked past. The number 1 hero, All Might, stood there in a yellow suit as he passed. "That was a dirty trick you played on those kids. The loser gets expelled. What were you thinking?" The hero in question shrugged him off, walking as he replied. Nonchalantly. Eraserhead didn't see the point in explaining his choice, given the harsh circumstances of the world. He may have potential, but it's foolish to let those kids live under false hope. One broke his finger just to get the class record, and the other has basically no quirk at all. The two may have the potential to grow, but you know what'll happen if they fail. It's a harsh world. The top hero watched Eraserhead walk away, knowing that he would be intentionally harsh on Midoriya and the black and white-haired boy. He knew Midoriya had potential, and even though the latter only got 18th, his demonstration of skill and strength thus far, such as how he got nearly 600 meters, proved he could hold his own even if he had no special trait. "You're a kind man in your own special way, Aizawa. Though it's clear that with your methods, we'll have a problem. Hey guys. You're going to the station too, right?" Ochako exclaimed, running up to Ida and Izuku. "Deku, how's your finger?" "It's fine, the boy replied, instantly getting flustered by her presence. Although, he was slightly confused by the name she gave. Wait, why'd you call me Deku? It's what Bakugo said earlier when you got a higher score than him, right? Like, I'll kill you Deku. I think it's a pretty cute name. Oh, alright, thanks. Izuku managed, struggling to look her in the eyes. I feel like my world is upside down. As Ida attempted to figure out what Deku was muttering about, the three made their way out of campus. Though Achiko spotted Taiyo walking alone down the path, his hair still fully black. As she was about to call out to him, she noticed how much more hostile he looked, and figured something was wrong. Hold on guys, give me a second. As Uraraka approached Taiyo, she noticed even by his body language how much more closed off he seemed than before, going from neutral to a vehement negative. She was surprised at how fast his demeanor changed since the apprehension test, since he did well all things considered. Hey, what's up? She said cheerfully, attempting to get him to respond. No response. Hello, she continued, trying to snap him out of whatever he seemed to be in. Though looking up at him, able to see his full face due to her angle, she noticed how empty his eyes looked. It almost looked like he was unconscious, dead even. The glossy stare he gave the ground didn't even count as such, as it seemed like he didn't regard anything's existence. Eventually, she just decided to walk beside him, giving him time to process whatever it seemed like he was going through. Compared to the other two, being with Taiyo was much more tense. At the same time, having the liberty to speak your mind unburdened was refreshing, at the very least. You know, she said, looking forward as she let her cheery demeanor fade a bit. In class, when you asked how we knew about what you said to Tsu, she appreciates you a lot, Uraraka continued, trying to get a response. You didn't hear it from me, but she doesn't seem like the confrontational type. And you do have a bit of an off-putting, solo nature to you, but maybe just give her a chance sometime. You seem like you could use a friend, she finished as she put a hand out to him, wondering how he would respond. After a few moments of pause, he looked over at her with the same disinterested gaze and shook her hand, continuing to walk. Sure. I'll tell him for you. As she stopped, preparing to walk away, she couldn't help but think about what he said. Tell him. But he was the one she was talking to, right? His voice sounded different too. Hey, Uraraka? Ida called out, as Deku still was too shy to call out for her, even after getting over his muttering. You're going to be late to the station. Turning towards the two and putting on her familiar smile, she couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for him. Was he going through something similar to her? Maybe it just wasn't his day. Either way, she couldn't let more of his business get out, so she just acted normal for the time being. I hope Tsu has a better effect on him than I did. The following morning, they went through the now usual routine of UA students. In the mornings, they ate and went through their core classes, a necessity for any school regardless of its purpose. Taiyo didn't really see the meaning of filling so much of the day with these classes, and Hitoshi didn't seem to like them at all because he already knew half of the subjects, though Shin was the only one of the three who seemed to tolerate it at best. Hey everyone! Look alive! Grammar rocks. Despite present Mix attempts at encouraging them, nearly the entire class seemed bored out of their minds, save for Deku, who was simply happy to be there, and Momo Yaoyorozu, another student in their class with long black hair and eyes. Ida was also participating, though at times it seemed like the two were battling it out for some sort of valedictorian role. Later on was lunch, made by mostly pro-heroes such as the cook hero, Lunch Rush. Despite originally going to sit by himself until he found a group later on, Uraraka dragged him over to their table, albeit with small noises of protest. While Hitoshi was no longer in control, he was still hesitant to do much of anything with people he didn't know well, as it just seemed to others like Ochako was dragging around a stone statue. As Ochako managed to get him to sit next to Deku, she made a mental note of his attitude beforehand compared to now. The previous day, he seemed almost naturally ticked off, though now he almost seemed comically unaware of everything, simply just going with the flow with few opinions from himself even when asked about the food. His hair is normal now too, Deku, Taiyo said, snapping Ochako out of her thought process. Your tie is wrong. 𝗧𝗂𝗏, the boy replied, not expecting him to say anything while he was still fanboying over Lunch Rush. However, before he could say much of anything, Taiyo was already redoing his tie, working on the knot. Did you want it short on purpose? He asked, making the knot look neater and less unprofessional. I can do that too. Izuku simply gave a weak nod as the other boy continued to tie his tie, making it clear how he was doing it as he went step by step. While he wasn't really used to having someone to do this for him, it seemed like Taiyo knew what he was doing, so he reluctantly let him even though it felt embarrassing to have someone correct his attire for him. Despite feeling a bit off at his behavior now compared to the end of school the last day, Ochako couldn't help but be grateful that he didn't seem as negative anymore. He also seemed to be most vocal with Izuku, due to him meeting him first. Whatever the reason was, she was simply excited for the last class to come, Hero Basic Training. I am here. The number 1 hero, All Might, dashed through the door exuberantly as the entire class lit up upon his entry. Nobody could have suspected that they would spend the day with All Might of all people. I can't believe it's actually him, a boy with yellow spiky hair named Kaminari exclaimed. So he is a teacher, Kirishima mentioned, seeming extremely eager. This year is gonna be awesome. Welcome to the most important class at UA High. Think of it as Heroing 101. Here, you'll learn everything you need to know about being a hero. And our first lesson. We pull no punches. He flashed a large card with large bold red letters spelling out the word battle, and by this definition, Taiyo could tell what they were most likely going to do. Fight training. Bakugo exclaimed, seeming excited for once all day. In contrast, Taiyo noticed Izuku seemed intrigued and slightly hesitant, which was understandable due to their only recent orientation. But an important part of being a hero is looking good. All Might exclaimed, pointing to the wall as multiple containers came out. Everyone was amazed and excited for their dream outfits to be standing right in front of them, as they each took their things. These are based on the multiple Quirk registration forms and requests you sent in before school, sent to an industry to be specially produced just for you. Get yourself suited and meet me at Training Ground Alpha. Yes, sir, the entire class said in unison, filing out as they prepared to get ready. Before Taiyo could leave, All Might stopped him, seeking to give him some last words as the boy seemed perplexed. Young Kadakuru, All Might said, still giving a grandiose aura though not as lavish as before. I've heard about your condition. Both conditions, as all medical forms, must be copied for our systems. We're aware that you aren't sure of your quirk's existence, but that wasn't you who threw that ball, was it? He asked, his bright smile still plastered on his face. Regardless, Taiyo answered, seeming to shut off slightly at the mention of his disorder. It was me who trained for a lifetime just to get here. Whether or not it was me in control, my body could handle that level of force. I'm capable of being in this course, whether or not anyone else in the school wants to admit that. Seeming pleased by his answer, All Might let him through, though not without one last remark. We're aware that the hero outfit we made isn't the one that you'll be bringing, he said, crossing his arms. That is fine. But we know about your family's weapons, due to martial god's reputation here in Japan. I ask you kindly to not use any of them, regardless of how good they may look. I'll see you soon, young Kadakuru. All Might finished as he waved to the boy, and left to the training ground. Taiyo said, rubbing his head and unzipping his book bag, revealing an old GI that he used to wear. Well, I guess that's fine. Let's do this. Looking great. All Might roared as Class 1A came out in their respective hero costumes. Ochako had on a suit and helmet similar to an astronaut's, while Ida's resembled that of battle armor. Tsuyu, talking to Ochako, had a green and yellow bodysuit with orange goggles, and a student named Tokoyami had simply a cape that complemented his dark theme. As Izuku came out, Ochako turned her head to him and excitedly greeted him. The boy was in a green and white costume, with 2 ear-like parts sticking up from his head, and a face mask reminiscent of All Might's smile, causing the pro-hero to silently scold Izuku for being so obvious. Whoa, hey Deku, she exclaimed, running up to him. Love the costume. Personally, though, it's not my style. Upon seeing her, the boy instantly got flustered, seeing as though he was infatuated by her hero costume. Mineta, a short boy with purple ball on his head, put his thumb up, murmuring something about loving the school and admiring Ochako for a different reason, leaving Izuku slightly perplexed. However, once everyone settled down, they heard the jingling of what sounded like chains from the tunnel where they entered from, as a figure emerged. The first thing visible was his black and white eyes, as his matching split-colored hair came into view, his dark skin causing it to pop out more. His costume was the most simple of them all, though effective. He wore a tight-fitting black shirt with a yin-yang symbol on the chest, tan baggy training with a black belt weaved through the waist, and black martial arts slippers. Around his waist was a chain, connecting to a single dagger with a jet-shaped blade, and a black handle. Upon seeing his hero outfit, multiple jaws dropped, though for wildly different reasons. Kirishima was the first to come up and compliment him on his relatively simple though impressive attire, and Ochako was equally impressed. Deku was just surprised that he went for something so simple, and Ida questioned his weapon though gave him credit for his ingenuity all the same. Tsuyu didn't approach him like the others, though she wasn't particularly disinterested. He looked surprisingly good before anyone else could butt in and interrupt the lesson. All Might spoke up and began to start explaining the activity as he pulled out a handbook. Is that a scry dash? Most of the villain fights you see on the news take place outside, though statistically speaking, the majority of the more dangerous fights take place inside. Think about it, shady buildings, secret lairs, the whole 9 yards. We'll split into teams of 2-on-2, good guys against bad guys. For those with more, that gives you an advantage. You can choose the matchup you think would be best against your opponents. Tsuyu, trying to keep up, responded to all the information. Isn't this a little advanced for us? The best training is what you get on the battlefield. All Might exclaimed, seeming no less concerned for the students. But remember, you can't just punch a robot this time, you're dealing with actual people now. After this, a wave of questions flooded in from the class, as many different individuals attempted to get clarification on the lesson. Taiyo just sat in the back, nodding off as a bewildered Izuku attempted to wake the split-haired boy up. Listen up. All Might commanded, attempting to get them to do exactly that and let him finish talking. The situation is as follows. The villains have hidden a nuclear missile somewhere in their hideout, and the heroes must try to foil their plans. To do this, the heroes must either capture the villains or retrieve the missile. Likewise, the bad guys win if they protect the payload or capture the heroes. After some debacle, the teams were chosen based on a random draw, as many people were paired. The teams included Izuku and Ochako, Bakugo and Ida, Shiro and Kirishima, Mina and Aoyama, Kaminari and Jairu, Ojiro and Hagakure, Todoroki and Shoji, and Sato and Koda. Or at least, that's what Taiyo thought everyone's names were. He ended up being a part of the team of 3 with Tokoyami and Tsuyu. Interesting. I'll be with you too for now then, Tokoyami responded, walking over to where Taiyo was sitting as Tsuyu stood idly next to the dozing boy, trying to decide whether to admire his choice of attire or be baffled that he had fallen asleep at such a time. Of all the times, it had to be now. That's just amazing, Karo. And I declare the first teams will be, All Might exclaimed as he dug into the boxes and pulled them out. These guys? The letters were H and J, meaning that the 3 would be facing off against Kirishima and Shiro, the black-haired boy with a tape quirk. After his yell, Taiyo snorted, waking up and rubbing his eyes as Tokoyami's dark shadow hit his head to wake him up. First up. Well, I guess that means we'll have to go all out and show up, huh man? Kirishima responded as he smiled at Shiro. So, who are we choosing? Tsuyu responded, looking at the 2. They have a good team when it comes to defense. Well, I was Taiyo interrupted Tokoyami as he stood up, finally being awake for the first time since the brief. Long range and short range, right? Shiro is good with his tape, and he can trap people easily. Kirishima has a hardening quirk from what I've heard. I think that I should go, but that's not just confident speaking. Kirishima can take Dark Shadow long enough to leave you open, so I think Tsuyu should go if not me. She would be a great counter for the both of them if we're caught off guard. Hearing his plan, Tokoyami was surprised at his thorough evaluation, though put in one of his ideas as they discussed. Dark Shadow gets stronger in darker areas, so it all depends on how dark the buildings are. But if you destroy anything, the light will just fly in, right? Taiyo responded, looking at him. It's too cramped to fight effectively like that. And if you break the walls to give yourself more room, You're just going to get weaker. Seeing how much thought he actually had put into this, 𝗬𝗂𝗵𝗍 relented, seeing that he was more insightful than he had initially believed. If you're correct, he replied, turning to Tsuyu. I think you and her should go. It's essentially the same matchup, but in different forms. I've never got to see your quirk, though. Are you sure you can fight Kirishima in a hand-to-hand brawl? If his hardening quirk is more durable than the robot's, he might give me a bit of trouble, Taiyo said as he stretched and gave his weapon to 𝗬𝗂𝗵𝗍. Hearing this, he seemed skeptical, not knowing how Taiyo performed in the entrance exam. But would you lose? Nah, I'd win. The Man and the Mountain chapter text. Who do you think's gonna win? Jdru, a girl with black hair and jacks on her earlobes, asked Kaminari. After all, we haven't really seen Taiyo's quirk, right? That is, if he even has one. Bakugo butted in, giving a distasteful sneer. That extra hasn't done anything special yet. It's silly if you think he's going to win against Flex Tape and Weird Hair. Not to mention he didn't score higher than Spiky Face either. Hearing this, Kaminari was slightly perplexed at his attitude but shrugged it off nonetheless. However, it was Izuku of all people to speak up on Taiyo's behalf, slightly surprising Uraraka. You don't know how capable he is for sure, he retorted, mustering the minuscule amounts of courage he had to speak up on his behalf. He remembered how well Taiyo handled himself, even saving him who supposedly was a carrier of a powerful quirk in the entrance exam, all without a quirk, and how he helped people despite seeming unbothered to do so. Even if he is quirkless, he's made it here. That has to count for something. Hearing Izuku's rebuttal, Bakugo snapped his head towards him, instantly off. What the hell did you say, Deku? Bakugo was already struggling to understand how the previously weak Midoriya was now standing there with him in Yue, the same one who he ridiculed and bullied, determined to find the source of his strength and prove himself better. The thought that someone without a quirk might be able to reach the same renown as him someday was the last straw in his mind, causing him extreme anger. Though before he could do anything, Ida stepped in front of Izuku, protecting the boy from the blonde's onslaught. Bakugo, there's no reason to fight outside of the lesson. Stand down, there's no need for violence here. Seeing that multiple eyes were on him, the brash blonde reluctantly stepped away, huffing as he waited for the matchup to begin. PSH whatever 4 eyes. Don't blame me when Oreo gets his butt kicked. As Bakugo backed off, Uraraka approached Izuku again, praising his adamance even though the latter was visibly shaking. That was really nice of you, Deku, she said as she gave him a wide grin, slightly causing his nerves to settle. But he does have a point. Do you think Taiyo's going to be okay? After he took a second to collect himself, the boy shrugged, looking downwards to the floor, equally as concerned. I don't know. But he said he would win. And I've seen what he's done, so I trust him. You got it? Taiyo asked Tsuyu, retying his black belt and preparing to enter when they were given the go-ahead. They had just finished preparations, attempting to smooth out a general plan. This is important. I don't think that much else will work. It would have been easier if we were defending, but this is the only way I can think of otherwise. The green-haired girl, having been slightly zoning out as he talked, gave a small nod to his words. She hadn't realized how long she was just staring at his face, though since he was talking to her, she figured it was just natural, and pushed away her worries. Sorry, just nervous I guess, Kero. Hearing how unsure she was, he stopped for a moment, looking over at her, but turning forward again without a word. For a moment, she thought she was off the hook, but he spoke again as he waited for them to be ready. I don't know how you feel about all this, Taiyo said, rubbing his head as he attempted to figure out what to say. But you're important in this plan. Invaluable, even. I know it's a lot, but there's no reason to be nervous. I gave you that job because I trust that you can hold your own, he said as he looked at Tsuyu, fidgeting slightly under his much calmer gaze. Though upon hearing that he knew that she would perform well, her demeanor shifted, seeming a bit more confident. She took a second to look away and get herself together, before taking a breath and responding, her never-changing expression hinting at some sort of appreciation. All right, I can do that, Kero. Thank you, Taiyo. As the screen above the building flashed "Go" in big blue letters, Taiyo dashed through the door, with Tsuyu following a good distance behind. The rest of the class watched on as Taiyo ran headfirst into the building, with many people seeming surprised at his headstrong tactics. What is he doing? Shoji, a boy with white jagged hair and a mutant quirk causing him to have multiple arms, asked, seeing him dash through the building. Is he planning on just going in alone? 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 watched on, knowing exactly what was occurring as he hoped that Taiyo's confidence about his ability to match up with Kirishima held up to be true. You better win, and just as Taiyo ran up the building, Kirishima ran down, the two having the exact same reaction, much to the entire class bewilderment. After a moment, they both met on the 4th floor, with Kirishima stopping and giving a hearty chuckle that Taiyo could only assume was his villainous laugh impression. Despite only being amused and not necessarily threatened, he allowed Kirishima to have his moment as they stood there at odds. Haha. It's I, the Scarlet Terror. And I'm totally gonna blow this place up if you don't stop me, he exclaimed as he cracked his fists, getting ready to fight as he activated his hardening quirk. But seriously, a one-on-one fight this early? I couldn't help running down here as fast as I could when I heard you were fighting us. But I'm not gonna go easy on you. Same here, Taiyo said as he cracked his neck and got in a stance. Despite the matchup, he had a small smile, fully confident that things would play in his favor. But I don't need to see the fight play out to know it's our win. A few seconds passed with them standing there, standing and waiting. Once a few seconds passed, Kirishima rushed in, attempting to punch Taiyo. The latter dodged, though was glad he didn't assume Kirishima got slower when he used his quirk, since he didn't slow at all. Taiyo threw an experimental jab at his side, and sure enough, it seemed more like a nudge to Kirishima than an actual hit. While he wasn't affected by punching at that force either, he figured it would be annoying if he had to put a lot of force into every blow, since that wasn't normally practical in most forms of fighting. However, yin-yang was not a normal form of fighting either. After a few punches were exchanged, Kirishima managed to land a solid blow, slightly cutting Taiyo's cheek. He didn't flinch at all to this, to the surprise of many, and simply ducked into the blow and wrapped his arms around Kirishima's waist. The hell? Bakugo exclaimed as they watched the fight between the two. Why isn't he reacting? He's been taking punches this whole time and he's acting like he's just as resilient as Kirishima. What is this BSTRD up to? Nobody else seemed to chime in after Bakugo's statement, choosing to ignore any unnecessary conflicts with the boy, though everyone was still watching intently as it seemed neither of them had an upper hand at the moment. Mina, a pink-haired girl with similarly pink skin, had cheered on Kirishima beforehand, though seeing Taiyo's noticeable lack of reaction to his punches started to seem like it would be a lot less obvious who won. After he got a hold of Kirishima, he did something similar to what he had done before, suplexing Kirishima into the floor. However, instead of putting him on his back, he burrowed Kirishima's head directly into the floor, using his hardening quirk against him. While Kirishima was stuck, he looked in the corner, as a figure barely visible darted past, seemingly disappearing as soon as they appeared. What? Izuku murmured, attempting to figure out what had just happened as Kirishima got himself free and continued his assault on Taiyo, who was simply deflecting and counterattacking for as long as possible. Though after thinking for a while, he finally figured out what was most likely going on, as he noticed Tsuyu was gone, no longer watching Taiyo from a distance. As the two fought it out, Izuku also noticed how intentionally precise every one of Taiyo's punches was, with him punching specific parts of Kirishima's body with force instead of wailing on the boy. He still got multiple cuts and bruises from Kirishima's own punches, though he didn't show any visible sign of pain, unlike Kirishima, who winced at every punch, showing that Taiyo was beginning to wear him down, much to their amazement. Once he heard a soft thump above him, Taiyo smiled and looked to Kirishima, who was catching his own breath after Taiyo backed off. I'm going to throw a punch, and it's going to be the last one I throw. I'm going to beat you here, Taiyo said as he put a fist forward, readying himself for the attack. Do your worst, Kirishima responded with a breathy chuckle, hardening his body as much as he could. After a moment, Taiyo dashed forward, about to throw a punch at Kirishima's 𝗧𝗏. Though at the last moment he simply moved past the boy, using his momentum to jump and punch the ceiling, walling Taiyo off from Kirishima with all the debris that fell, though not without injuring his hands slightly from punching the boy for so long. Ah, dang it! Kirishima yelled, trying to get through the rubble. That was a nice one. Dirty move though, he exclaimed as he worked on getting through the multiple layers of debris and other items from the higher floor as Taiyo ran off. What? Bakugo yelled, causing everyone to be taken slightly off guard. How did that extra manage to pull a stunt like that? It makes no sense. He's just using his environment to his advantage, Momo replied, seemingly impressed by the Taiyo's ingenuity. You saw his hands. He was never going to win in an enclosed area like that where he was forced to stay close. I'm more surprised he never flinched at all and actually almost broke Kirishima's hardening, she said as she saw him approach the top floor. As Taiyo reached the top and opened the door, he took a moment to breathe, chuckling at the sight. I told you that you could do it. Across from him was Tsuyu, having managed to capture Zero after utilizing her ability to slightly camouflage because of her frog quirk, easily overwhelming him since she got the jump on him. Tsuyu managed to capture the warhead while Taiyo distracted Kirishima, who had run in moments after him, meaning they were the winners. What happened down there? Tsuyu asked, looking at their condition. They had already done what they needed, though she was still puzzled by the surprisingly present injuries on the two. We were just it was great. Kirishima butt in, wrapping his arm around Taiyo's shoulder, causing the latter to flinch in surprise. I never knew Taiyo would be so tough. I would have had him if he didn't pull that trick on me though. Seeing that the two were still acting relatively normal, Tsuyu calmed down slightly, picking Zero up with her tongue and making her way out with the other two, with Kirishima keeping his same bright attitude as they cleared out the building, getting ready for the next pairs to fight. Taiyo? Tsuyu called after walking up to him, having been apologizing to Tokoyami for not being able to include him, even though he didn't seem particularly interested. Upon hearing her, he looked at Tokoyami, who simply turned his head away as Taiyo went with Tsuyu, waiting for whatever she had on her mind. However, it took a while for Tsuyu to actually articulate it, trying to find the words for what she wanted to say. I know that you got a bit beat up when you were fighting Kirishima. I'm sorry for taking so long. Taiyo looked at Tsuyu for a moment, confused by her apology, though shaking his head and responding. You can't prevent injuries, Tsuyu. It was going to happen either way. I was basically punching a boulder. Thanks for your help though. I should be apologizing for relying on you every time we happen to team up, he said as he gave a slight grin and put a hand out, causing Tsuyu to hesitate for a moment. What was he requesting? A handshake? Did he want to hold her hand? She didn't want to upset him after doing so much for her without anything in return. After a second, she just decided to grab his hand, going along with whatever he wanted her to do. He gave her a short handshake and pulled his hand away, going back to looking at the screen where Izuku and Ochako contended with Bakugo and Ida. For some reason, Tsuyu felt slightly off afterward, though just assumed it was the battle and watched the trial as well. By the way, Tsuyu managed, looking back over at Taiyo as she tried to pinpoint exactly what was going on with her. She knew she had relied a lot on him just in the past hour, making her hesitate to ask for any more favors. Would you mind going to the station with me after this? Ochako is helping Deku with something and all right, he said before she could make her reasoning, not appearing to understand the extreme turmoil going on in the girl next to him. Just give me a while. Tsuyu looked back at the screen, seeming a bit less anxious now that he had answered her. Although she never really understood why that was always the case. He's an inspirational guy, it's normal. It's fine. However, in the back of her head, she couldn't help but think that for once, someone might be supporting her more than she helped them, doing so much for her intentionally, or not, that she couldn't think to repay them. And that scared her.